I am Charles Mitchell, 75 years old, and I thought I knew what betrayal looked like until my own son redefined it completely. As a retired electrician who built a modest life in Toledo, Ohio, I believed family meant something. I raised David alone after my wife passed, sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had. Last Tuesday, he picked me up for what I thought was my birthday lunch. I wore my best sweater, even combed what's left of my hair. Between the grocery store flowers and his forced smile, David drove me straight to Sunset Manor Nursing Home. He handed over pre-signed papers and a suitcase I never packed. 1 week later, I won $15 million in the lottery. But before I tell you how I used that money to destroy him, let me explain how a devoted father became a dangerous enemy. Stick around until the end and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I woke up on my 75th birthday with that familiar flutter in my chest, that warm anticipation you get when you know someone cares enough to remember. David hadn't called much lately, said work at the insurance company was brutal, that things with his wife Linda were rocky. But surely he'd show up today. I made coffee his favorite blend, even set 2 mugs on the kitchen table. By noon, I was still alone. My heart sank a little, but I refused to spiral into self-pity. I checked my phone a dozen times, reread old texts just to feel some connection to the son I'd raised alone after my Martha passed. At 2 p.m., the doorbell rang. I opened it to see David standing there with that boyish grin he used to wear when he wanted something extra for Christmas. "Happy birthday, Dad," he said, holding a small grocery store bouquet. The flowers looked tired, like they'd been sitting in his car for hours. I smiled through the sting and hugged him. "You came." "Of course," he said, patting my back stiffly. "Get dressed. I made lunch reservations." I didn't question it. I grabbed my good coat, the one I wore to church, slid on the shoes that pinched my feet, but looked respectable. I felt giddy, like a kid going somewhere special. But we didn't drive toward downtown or any restaurant I recognized. We pulled into a place with a long driveway lined with oak trees, whose leaves had turned golden brown. I looked up at the sign and felt my stomach twist. Sunset Manor Senior Living Facility. "David, what is this?" He cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes. "Dad, we need to talk. This living alone thing isn't safe anymore. You've had some memory issues, confusion spells." "What memory issues?" I snapped. "I remember everything just fine." He kept talking like I hadn't spoken. "I found a great place. It's safe, comfortable. You'll have people your age, activities, proper medical care." I laughed, but it wasn't the kind of laugh that feels good. "You're kidding. You brought me here on my birthday." That's when he got out of the car and opened the trunk. My brown suitcase was already packed, sitting there like evidence of a crime I didn't know I'd committed. "You went through my things." He sighed heavily. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Dad." Inside Sunset Manor, time seemed to stop. Smiling faces at reception, the smell of disinfectant mixed with cafeteria food. David handed over papers, legal documents with my name and his signature. Transfer of power of attorney. Done deal. I didn't cry then. Not yet. I let them lead me to a room with pale yellow walls, an adjustable bed, and a small window facing a parking lot. My birthday gift. I sat on the edge of that bed with my coat still on, feeling something cold and final settle in my bones. No cake, no candles, just the distant sound of a television somewhere down the hall, playing game shows for people who'd already lost everything that mattered. Hours passed. I finally opened that wilted bouquet. The flowers looked exactly like I felt. That night, I lay awake listening to my roommate Walter snore and mumble about people who hadn't visited him in years. The mattress was too firm. The sheets smelled like industrial bleach. I replayed every conversation with David over the past year, trying to see the signs I'd missed. I thought of all the times I'd said yes when I should have questioned. The times I'd covered for him when he borrowed money, made excuses to neighbors, when he didn't visit, swallowed disappointment, because I thought that's what fathers do. But that night, lying in that sterile room, something inside me cracked. Something essential and trusting died, and what replaced it was harder, sharper. The next morning, I asked a nurse for my cell phone. She smiled that professional smile and said David had taken care of it, disabled the line because it was too confusing for seniors. That's when the full picture became clear. I wasn't here to be cared for. I was here to be erased, silenced, forgotten. And if I didn't find a way out, they'd succeed in making me disappear completely. But David had made one critical mistake. He assumed I was the same trusting man who'd raised him with endless patience and forgiveness. He thought I'd go quietly into that good night, grateful for his concern. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Because I wasn't planning to disappear. I was planning to vanish on my own terms, and when I came back, I'd have the power to destroy everything he'd built on lies. The war had begun, and David had just handed me every reason I needed to win it. I stopped eating for 2 days, not because I was making a statement, but because I simply couldn't stomach the food or the reality. There's something about being treated like you're no longer useful that breaks a part of you that never fully heals. The nurses were kind mostly, but kindness can feel like pity when you're trapped. They called me Sweetie and Han like I was 10 or 100. No one asked what I did before. No one asked what I loved. To them, I was just another old man wearing slippers and forgetting things, even though I hadn't forgotten a damn thing. Then on the 4th day, I met Patricia. She wasn't supposed to work that shift. Another nurse called in sick, and Patricia Young, with dark hair pinned up under her scrub cap, and genuine warmth in her eyes filled in. She was checking my blood pressure when she said, "You don't belong here." I looked at her startled. She smiled. "Don't get me wrong. A lot of folks need help, and that's okay. But you don't seem lost." I blinked away the sudden sting in my eyes. We got to talking. She asked about David. I told her what I could without falling apart completely. She listened. Not just nodded politely, really listened. Later that day, she came back with something in her hand. "This belonged to Mr. Patterson, Henderson, a resident who passed last week," she whispered. "We found it tucked inside his Bible. No family claimed it. It was a lottery ticket folded in yellow, dated 2 weeks earlier." I chuckled dry and bitter. "And you want me to try my luck?" She winked. "Hey, the universe owes you something." I didn't plan to do it. Not at first. It felt silly desperate. But boredom and desperation make strange partners. That night, I waited until the hallway was quiet, then used one of the facility's ancient desktop computers in the lounge. I typed in the numbers with shaking fingers. My hand froze over the mouse. My eyes scanned the page again and again. $15 million. I covered my mouth with both hands, looking around frantically. No one was there. The silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't joy I felt. Not at all. It was pure electric fear. If David found out, if anyone found out before I could protect myself, they'd take everything. I printed the confirmation, folded it small, and tucked it inside my shirt pocket. The next day, I called Patricia aside. "I need to talk to someone privately," I said. "Someone legal." She didn't ask why. She just nodded. Patricia knew someone, a volunteer attorney who came by twice a month to help seniors with wills and estate planning. I waited with my heart pounding until he arrived that Friday. His name was Robert Wilson Young Sharp, and most importantly, discreet. We sat in the tiny break room while I slid him the lottery confirmation. "Can you help me disappear?" I whispered. His eyebrows rose, but he didn't flinch. "We'll need to move fast." The next few hours were a blur. Paperwork, notarizations, financial transfers. Robert contacted an independent financial advisor who set up a blind trust. My name was nowhere visible. David would never see a cent. I signed a new will, leaving everything to charity, David had already signed away my life once. I wouldn't let him profit from it. Robert helped me purchase a modest house under the trust name in rural Kentucky. Something off the grid but livable. No cameras, no neighbors too close, just enough distance between me and the life I was leaving behind. Patricia hugged me on the night I left. "Don't forget us when you're free," she whispered. I didn't cry, I couldn't. I slipped away just before dawn wearing clothes that weren't mine, carrying a duffel bag with only the essentials. They thought I was senile, broken alone. But I was about to become a ghost with $15 million. Let them look for me. They'd never see me coming. The bus ride out of Ohio was long and cold. I sat near the back hood, up sunglasses on, clutching that duffel like it held my soul. In many ways it did. I didn't know exactly where I was going. All I knew was that I had to get far enough away that no one could find me. Not David, not his wife, not the lawyers he'd likely already called. When we crossed the Kentucky border, I exhaled for the first time in hours. Freedom had a taste, and it wasn't sweet. It was metallic like blood and fear. The house was nothing fancy. A single-story brick structure with chipped paint and a crooked mailbox, but it had a working heater, clean water, and most importantly, and silence. Not the kind you get in a nursing home surrounded by people who've given up. This was the kind of silence that let you breathe. The next few days I lived like a shadow. I cooked simple meals, walked to the mailbox, sat on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the wind carry dead leaves across the yard. I kept the lottery ticket in a fireproof box under the floorboard in the hallway closet. Alongside it, the new will, a burner phone, and a note addressed to whoever finds this just in case. But deep down, I knew this quiet couldn't last. David was going to come looking, and when he did, I needed to be ready. Because I wasn't hiding anymore. I was hunting. One morning about a week after I left Sunset Manor, the quiet shattered. A knock at the door. I froze. I hadn't told a soul where I was. I didn't even have a credit card linked to my name. My heart beat like a war drum in my chest. I tiptoed to the window and peeked through the blinds. Just a delivery man. Groceries. Part of the arrangement Robert had set up. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were watching me from somewhere I couldn't see. That afternoon, curiosity got the better of me. I created a fake Facebook profile and searched for David. There he was, smiling in his profile picture, like the world hadn't fallen apart. In his latest post, he wrote, "If anyone has seen my father, Charles Mitchell, please contact me or the Toledo police. He's been missing for several days. We're worried about his safety." Beneath it, hundreds of comments poured in. Prayers, condolences, people praising David for being such a devoted son. I laughed so hard I nearly choked. They had no idea. None of them. But what truly broke something inside me wasn't the post. It was the photo he used. It wasn't recent. It was from 5 years ago, one of the last birthdays we celebrated together. I had a party hat on and David had his arm around me. We looked happy, and how easy it is to perform love in pictures. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the living room staring at the cold fireplace, my thoughts going in circles. The longer I sat with them, the darker they became. I remembered every time I'd given David money, every loan that was never repaid, every subtle comment designed to make me doubt myself. He'd say things like, "You told me that already, Dad," when I hadn't. Or, "You're forgetting more and more these days." I thought I was aging poorly. I thought it was my fault. It wasn't. He wanted me to doubt myself so when he took control of my life I wouldn't resist. Well, I was done being controlled. The next morning I called Robert from my burner phone. "I need you to update my will again." He didn't ask why. "What changes?" "I want to make it very clear. David Mitchell receives absolutely nothing. Not a dollar, not a keepsake, not a memory." "Done," he said. "You're safe now, Charles." But I wasn't. Not yet. Because deep down I knew something was coming and I needed to be ready for it. It started with a letter. Plain envelope, no return address tucked among utility bills and junk mail. I wouldn't have noticed it if not for the paper. Heavier than usual, expensive. My stomach turned the second I touched it. Inside was a single sheet, a photocopy. My signature, or what looked like it. Below it, 2 others. One from my late wife Martha, and another from David. It was a loan document dated 12 years ago. A $20,000 personal loan taken out in both Martha's and my names. The bank's logo was real. So was the notary stamp. But I'd never signed that paper. Never. I sat down on the worn sofa, the letter trembling in my hands. The document had my handwriting down to the loop in the C of Charles. But something about it was off. Too clean, too practiced. Martha would never have hidden a loan like that from me. And David, he never said a word. I pulled out the fireproof box, retrieved the folder Robert had helped me compile before I left. A collection of past financial documents we'd salvaged. Inside, I found 3 more forms, all with my forged signature. A cold realization slithered through me like ice water in my veins. David had been stealing from Martha and me for years. It explained the strange tension in our final years together. The way Martha avoided certain financial topics. How we suddenly had less money than we should have. How David always seemed to need cash for emergencies but drove a newer car every year. The quiet arguments at night I thought were about her health. The canceled vacation plans. The bad investments I blamed on the market. It was David, all along. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I opened my laptop and began digging deeper. Over the next 3 days, I pieced it all together like a jigsaw puzzle made of lies and theft. David had falsified several loan documents using Martha's social security number and mine. The amounts varied. Some had been quietly paid off, probably by Martha, before she died, taking the shame with her. But one account still active showed a ballooning balance of over $30,000, and it had defaulted under my name just 3 months before I was dropped at Sunset Manor. I sat in the darkness of that little Kentucky living room screen, glowing in front of me, hands clenched so tight my knuckles ached. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft, fraud, criminal activity spanning over a decade. I reached out to Robert again. I have new information. Forged documents, fraudulent loans. David did it all. I believe you, he said calmly. Do you want to press charges? Not yet. I wasn't ready. Not because I had doubts. Those were gone. I wasn't ready because I wanted him to feel the fear first, the silence, the not knowing. I wanted him to wonder if I knew. Because the truth was, I wasn't hiding anymore. I was hunting. I began gathering every document I could find. Every account tied to my name, every old email, every financial notice David had once sent on my behalf. I even contacted our old bank and requested records under a legal pretext Robert helped me draft. Piece by piece, the puzzle formed, and what it revealed made my blood run cold. David had taken out a high-interest loan against the small contracting business Martha and I once co-founded back in the 80s, a handyman venture we ran from our garage in those early years. He used that LLC, still technically active, to secure a $30,000 line of credit. He signed it using Martha's name 2 years after she had died. That wasn't just immoral. That was federal fraud. I saved everything to an encrypted folder, backed it up, and printed copies to store in the box beneath the floorboards. I wasn't sure how long I had, because if David was as desperate as I suspected, and if he had even the slightest clue that I had vanished with millions, he'd be coming for me soon. Have you ever looked at someone you loved your entire life and realized you never truly knew them? That's what it felt like, scrolling through pages of documents that tied my son to a trail of deceit so long and tangled, it made my stomach churn. The man I once taught to ride a bike had grown into a stranger. And not just any stranger, a dangerous one. By now, I had confirmed everything. David had forged my signature, lied to banks, manipulated Martha into covering for him, and worst of all, he had done it all behind the mask of a loving son. But the darkest truth came through a simple search buried in a public database. With Robert's help and access, I found it. David Mitchell, currently under federal investigation for fraudulent tax filings, embezzlement, and identity misuse. Identity misuse. That phrase hit like a physical blow. I clicked on the case file, trembling. The details were mostly redacted, but the accusations were crystal clear. David had been creating false identities, inflating incomes, falsifying deductions, and submitting returns to siphon money through refunds. Some of those identities were deceased people. Some were elderly. Some were real people who had no idea their names were being used, including me. The IRS had flagged several returns filed in my name over the past 3 years. Returns I had no knowledge of, claiming deductions for businesses I didn't own, medical expenses I didn't have. I stared at the screen, my mind spinning out of control. Had he planned to take my money from the very beginning? Was this the reason he was so quick to shove me into a facility and shut down my phone? It wasn't concern for my safety. It was containment. He wanted to keep me silent, disoriented, and out of the way while he continued his schemes. I pushed back from the desk, pacing the narrow living room, one hand on my chest to quiet the tremors. My own son had weaponized my identity, used my name as a tool for his criminal schemes, and when the heat came down, he'd planned to put me away like a loose end in a messy story. Only now I wasn't just a loose end. I was the one holding the thread that could unravel his entire life. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, I started documenting everything methodically. Every lie, every loan, every forged signature, on every piece of paper. I printed them, filed them in manila folders, labeled them with dates and amounts. I began recording audio notes, not because I was scared of forgetting, but because I wanted my voice to be the last one heard if anything happened to me. Then I made a choice that would change everything. I mailed a copy of the entire file anonymously to the Department of Justice. Not to make a formal complaint, not yet, but to plant a seed. They'd have the evidence. If something ever happened to me, they'd know exactly where to look. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that David somehow knew I was out there. I started noticing cars parked longer than usual near the house. Once a man knocked on the door claiming he was doing a neighborhood survey. I didn't open it, just watched from behind the curtain, phone in hand, ready to call Robert. Every knock, every unexpected sound made me jump. And still, I didn't run. Not this time. I had work to finish. I made another call to Robert. We need to finalize everything. The trust, the will, all of it. I want everything bulletproof. He agreed without hesitation. We set it all up with layers of legal protection so thick that if David ever tried to claim inheritance, he'd be bounced out of every court in the country. But as much as I tried to shield myself with paperwork and strategy, the emotional reality hit hardest in the quiet moments. I'd sit at night and remember David as a boy. His laugh when I taught him to fish. The way he used to fall asleep on the couch during Sunday football. I remembered the teenage years when things got complicated, but I never gave up on him. The college applications I helped him fill out. The job interviews I coached him through. The day he graduated and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. How did I miss the moment he started slipping away? How long had he been planning this while I kept believing in the son I thought I knew? Maybe that's the worst kind of betrayal. The one you watch unfold in slow motion, always hoping you're wrong, always making excuses, always giving one more chance. But now I knew the truth, and I wasn't going to let him rewrite the ending of my story. For the first time in my life, I held all the power, and I was going to use every bit of it. The letter came in a plain white envelope, no return address. But the moment I saw the handwriting, I knew. David had always written in sharp, slanted strokes like his pen was angry at the paper. Inside was a single sentence, "I know what you did, and this isn't over." I read it twice, then laughed. Not from amusement, but because it was exactly the kind of arrogance I expected from him. No, I miss you. No, where are you? Just a threat wrapped in his usual entitlement. I folded the letter neatly and slid it into my growing folder of evidence. By now, I'd been gone almost 3 weeks, and David had launched what looked like a full-scale public campaign begging for information, giving interviews to local news stations, playing the role of the heartbroken son, searching for his confused and vulnerable father. It would have been almost funny if it weren't so calculated and cruel. And then, just as I feared, David made his move. A letter arrived from the county courthouse in Toledo, official and certified. I signed for it with trembling hands and sat down to open it at the kitchen table. He had filed a petition to have me declared mentally incapacitated. I couldn't breathe. The document included statements from 2 people claiming I'd shown erratic and confused behavior over the past year. One was a former neighbor, Mrs. Peterson. The other was David's college friend, Mark, someone I barely knew, but who'd apparently been watching me closely. David's lawyer had submitted audio clips, too, snippets of old voicemails I'd left when I was distressed about Martha's medical bills or simply venting about everyday frustrations, chopped and edited to make me sound unwell, unstable, paranoid. He even attached a letter from a psychiatrist, one I'd never met, claiming concern over my disappearing and what he called paranoid behavior patterns consistent with early-stage dementia. They wanted the court to freeze my accounts, seize control of any assets, and bring me back into state custody. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks. I felt like the air had been punched from my lungs. Robert came that same night. He read everything, his expression unreadable. "We've got work to do," he finally said. "But Charles, you need to stay calm. You need to stay sharp. They're counting on panic." I nodded, too numb to speak. The next few days moved like a controlled storm. Robert contacted an experienced litigator to help us prepare. We gathered documents, video calls proving my competency, financial logs, showing clear decision-making, even a detailed journal I'd been keeping, to demonstrate my mental clarity. We scheduled an independent psychiatric evaluation. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Anderson, came to the house and spent 3 hours with me. She asked about my childhood, Martha, David, my work as an electrician. I told her everything, holding nothing back. She didn't pity me. She listened with professional attention and asked real questions that demanded real answers. When she left, she touched my shoulder and said, "You're the most lucid person I've seen this week." It felt like the first full breath I'd taken in days. Still, the pressure mounted. News of the hearing leaked somehow. The internet, which had briefly sympathized with David's missing father's story, began to shift. Questions arose. Why hadn't I contacted anyone myself? Was I really unstable? Was someone else pulling the strings behind my disappearance? The media loves a mystery, and David knew exactly how to feed them one. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had more than just proof of my sanity. I had purpose, and I had the truth. In the quiet of my small home, I began preparing a video statement. I didn't publish it yet, but I wanted to be ready just in case they tried to silence me permanently. I looked directly into the camera and said, "My name is Charles Mitchell. I am of sound mind, and I was betrayed by the person I trusted most. I didn't disappear because I was confused. I disappeared because I was in danger. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I just told the truth because I knew what was coming next. And this time I wouldn't be the one on trial." The courthouse in Toledo hadn't changed since the last time I'd been there years ago when I paid a traffic ticket. Back then, I was just another citizen, hoping to clear up a mistake. Now I was the accused, fighting for my right to exist as a free man. Robert had advised me to dress simply but confidently. Something that said, "I'm not here to beg, I'm here to be heard." I wore a navy blue suit, Martha's old watch, and a pair of dress shoes that clicked purposefully with each step through the courthouse halls. David was already seated at the front when I arrived. He stood, as I entered, like a perfect performance. A mask of concern draped over his face. He even offered a smile, the kind that strangers would interpret as warmth, but I saw it for what it was. He was here to bury me legally. The judge, an older man with tired eyes, introduced the case. in the matter of Charles Mitchell's mental competency. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire I hadn't started. David's attorney went first, a tall man with a polished voice and too much confidence. He laid it out like a script he'd rehearsed. Charles had gone missing. Charles was behaving erratically. Charles was possibly being manipulated by unknown parties. Charles was a danger to himself and potentially to others. He introduced the psychiatrist's letter, the one from the doctor I'd never met, and presented those audio clips of me edited and spliced like a horror movie trailer. I listened to myself sound scattered, desperate, even unstable, taken completely out of context from conversations about Martha's hospital bills and insurance nightmares. I watched the judge's eyebrows rise. My hands clenched around the armrest of my chair. Then David spoke. "Your Honor," he said, voice trembling just the right amount. "I love my father. I really do. This is the hardest thing I've ever done. But I believe he's being taken advantage of by someone. He's not himself. He's lost, and I'm terrified he's going to get hurt." That's when I stood up. "My turn, Your Honor." The judge nodded. I walked slowly to the witness stand, pausing just long enough to let the weight of my presence settle over the courtroom. Then I spoke clearly, deliberately. "My name is Charles Mitchell. I am 75 years old. I am not mentally impaired. I am not lost, and I am not anyone's victim." I opened my folder methodically and handed a copy of Dr. Anderson's full psychiatric report to the judge. Signed, dated, and certified. The verdict: completely sound mind, no indicators of cognitive decline, emotionally stable. I watched David's attorney's shoulders tense. David's face twitched almost imperceptibly. Then I continued. "I have here a log of every phone call I made the week before I left the facility. Receipts for the transfer of funds to a legal trust. Medical records clean and current. And a signed affidavit from the attorney who helped me leave Sunset Manor stating I was lucid, logical, and in full control of my decisions." I paused, meeting the judge's eyes directly. "I also have something else. But I won't be presenting that today. Not unless I absolutely need to." I didn't show them the file with every fraudulent signature, every stolen loan, every manipulated tax document David had ever touched. That was my ace in the hole. Instead, I turned toward the judge and spoke from my heart. He put me in that facility without my consent, took my phone, took my freedom, and now he wants to take what little dignity I have left. My voice, my independence, my right to make my own choices. Don't let him. The courtroom was completely still. Robert sat beside me, silent but steady. His eyes met mine with quiet pride, not surprise. The judge leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, reviewing the documents I'd presented. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke slowly and deliberately. "I need time to review all documentation and the independent medical evaluation. The court will reconvene in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? David turned toward me as the session ended. He tried to catch my eye, probably planning some last-minute manipulation, but I didn't give him the satisfaction. I gathered my papers, stood up straight, and walked out of that courtroom with my head high. He left with clenched fists and a jaw set tight. His mask was cracking, and everyone could see it. 2 weeks. That's how long the judge gave us to prepare for round 2. But David didn't waste a single day. Within hours of leaving the courthouse, he doubled down on his public campaign. The local news ran a new segment, "Missing Father Reappears in Court, Son Fears Exploitation." David spoke directly to the camera, eyes, moist voice shaking just enough to seem genuine. "I just want to make sure my father is safe," he said. "He's been through a lot. He's not thinking clearly, and I'm afraid there are people around him with bad intentions." I watched the broadcast from my living room, arms folded, jaw tight. There were no people with bad intentions around me. Just me. Just Charles Mitchell, the man who'd raised him, who'd sacrificed everything, who'd forgiven more than any father should have to. And he had the audacity to paint me as a puppet. That was the moment I knew the silent war I'd declared wasn't enough anymore. I needed to go on the offensive. I called Robert and told him to send the sealed envelope. Every document I'd collected, every piece of evidence of David's fraud, went straight to the Department of Justice. Not to the court, but to the federal investigators who could do real damage. "This will get their attention," Robert said after reviewing the file. "I'm counting on it." But I wasn't done. That night, using one of my new financial aliases, I made a substantial donation. $5 million to a national nonprofit organization that protects elderly individuals from financial abuse. No name attached, just the transfer. Within a week, they launched a major awareness campaign. They didn't use my case specifically, but the timing was too perfect for coincidence. People started asking harder questions online. How does a father disappear, then reappear with legal representation, but his own son tries to lock him away? Comments flooded social media. Something's off with this son. Let the old man speak for himself. Why hasn't anyone asked for his side of the story? David's carefully constructed image of the devoted son began to crack and crumble. Then came a break I hadn't expected. A journalist from a major newspaper reached out to Robert. She wanted to hear my side of the story directly. She promised discretion, no photos, just the truth. I agreed. We met at a quiet diner 2 towns over. I wore sunglasses and a baseball cap, sat in the corner booth with my back to the wall. She hit record on her phone and let me talk. I told her about the facility, about being dropped there, without warning, about David cutting off my phone and taking control of my accounts. When she asked about the court case, I simply said, "He's trying to erase me because I know things he doesn't want anyone else to know." I didn't mention the lottery winnings. Not yet. That card was still too valuable to play. The story ran 2 days later. Father or Fortune: The Silencing of Charles M. It didn't take long for people online to connect the dots. Was the missing father actually behind the anonymous donation? Was this why his son wanted him declared incompetent? The whispers grew louder, the doubts deeper. And still I remained quiet because David's downfall wouldn't come from an accusation. It would come from a reckoning he'd built for himself. 2 days before the court reconvened, Robert received a phone call that changed everything. It was from the Department of Justice. They had received our anonymous file, and they were opening a formal investigation into David Mitchell. David didn't know it yet, but while he was building his castle of lies in courtrooms and cameras, I was setting fire to the foundation, and the flames were getting higher. The second hearing felt different from the moment I walked in. The air was charged with something new. David entered the courtroom looking less confident this time. His shoulders weren't quite as straight. His lawyer whispered urgently as they took their seats. They'd seen the article. They'd felt the shift in public opinion. They were feeling the cracks in their perfect narrative. I sat calmly, my folder of documents resting in my lap. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was focused, sharp, ready. This time we went first. Robert opened with a statement that silenced the entire courtroom. "Your Honor," he began. "Since the last hearing, we've completed a comprehensive independent psychiatric evaluation, submitted detailed financial logs proving Mr. Mitchell's mental competency and sound decision-making, and have discovered through legitimate public records that the petitioner, Mr. David Mitchell, is currently under federal investigation for multiple financial crimes, including identity theft and tax fraud." He handed the judge a copy of the public case docket. David's attorney shot up immediately, protesting. "That investigation has no bearing on this competency hearing, Your Honor." The judge held up a hand. "Sit down." The courtroom held its collective breath. Then came the real blow. Dr. Anderson took the stand. Calm, professional, devastating in her clarity. She confirmed that I was not only mentally competent, but emotionally stable and fully aware of my decisions, including my choice to leave the nursing facility. "He's not only lucid, Dr. Anderson said, looking directly at the judge. He's deliberate and thoughtful in his responses. There is absolutely no medical basis for any declaration of incompetence. I looked at David then. His hands were gripping the table so tightly, his knuckles had gone white. That mask of concern he'd worn so carefully was finally slipping away completely. Robert then presented our timeline. It showed exactly when David had attempted to seize control of my accounts, and how that perfectly coincided with large withdrawals he'd made from his own failing business accounts. Coincidence? Robert asked the court. Hardly. The judge reviewed everything in absolute silence. When David was offered the opportunity to respond, he stood with visible effort. His voice cracked when he spoke. My father is being manipulated by someone. He wouldn't act like this unless he was confused or being controlled. This isn't the man who raised me. That's when I stood up and faced him directly across that courtroom. I am exactly the man who raised you, I said, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. I am the man who stayed up with you when you had pneumonia at age 7, who gave up vacations to pay for your college classes, who pawned my father's watch to cover your rent when you lost that job in Cleveland. I am that man, and you left me in a facility like I was nothing. I turned to face the judge. And now, Your Honor, I ask you to let me prove that I am not nothing. The judge leaned forward, fingers steepled, and spoke slowly and deliberately. Mr. Mitchell, based on the overwhelming evidence provided, your independent psychiatric evaluation, and the serious inconsistencies in the petitioner's claims, I am dismissing this case entirely. Your financial accounts and personal autonomy are fully restored. This court recognizes you as mentally competent and legally independent. I didn't cry, but my hands trembled slightly as I picked up my papers. David didn't say a word as I walked past his table. His eyes were wild, not with anger anymore, but with pure fear. He knew it was over, at least this part of it. But what David didn't know was that while he'd spent weeks trying to prove I was unstable, I'd been building something far more powerful than just a defense. I'd been constructing his destruction piece by piece, and I wasn't finished yet. The phone call came just after midnight that same night. Robert's voice was tense but satisfied. It happened, Charles. The DOJ had opened formal proceedings. David's name is officially on the federal docket. I sat there in the dark Kentucky silence, staring out at the wind moving through the trees. A part of me had been waiting for this moment for weeks. But now that it had arrived, it didn't feel victorious. It felt inevitable, like watching a building collapse that had been crumbling from the inside for years. The next morning, the world caught up with David Mitchell. The media swarmed first. David Mitchell's son in high-profile elder abuse case under federal investigation. My name wasn't mentioned directly in most reports, but the connections were too obvious to ignore. People remembered the missing father, the court battle, the anonymous donation to elder advocacy groups, the man who disappeared, but stood strong in court weeks later. Now their perfect son was unraveling in real time, and they wanted answers. I stayed quiet for 2 more days, turned off the television, ignored the burner phone. I cooked myself breakfast, watched the birds peck at the frost-covered yard, sat with a pen in hand writing letters I would never send. But silence wasn't justice. It was time to speak. I reached out to Linda Cooper, the journalist who had interviewed me anonymously weeks earlier. I told her I was ready to go public this time. Full interview on camera, no more shadows. We scheduled it for the following Friday. National News primetime feature. She asked if I was absolutely certain. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I told her. The day of the interview, I dressed simply. Gray sweater, small silver cufflinks that had been my father's, no makeup artist, no media consultant. Just the truth. We sat across from each other in a quiet studio, the lights warm and steady. Linda leaned forward with genuine concern in her eyes. Charles, the world knows the headlines now. They've read about David, about the investigation. But what they don't know is the heart of this story. Why are you speaking out now? I looked directly into the camera knowing millions would see this. Because it's not just about me, I said. It's about every parent who gave everything and was thrown away. Every older adult who gets dismissed, erased, or locked up under the excuse of love and concern. I was almost one of them, and I won't be quiet anymore. Then I told the complete story. The nursing home, the lottery ticket, the lies I uncovered, the evidence I'd gathered and sent to federal investigators. I left out nothing that mattered. Linda's eyes filled with tears as I spoke, but I didn't cry. I was finished crying. I was done being a victim. That night, the interview aired to 12 million viewers. Messages poured in from across the country. People sharing their own stories of family betrayal, financial abuse, elderly abandonment. I wasn't just Charles Mitchell anymore. I had become a mirror reflecting back pain that millions of families kept hidden. David didn't speak publicly after the broadcast, but sources close to him told reporters he was devastated and that his life was falling apart. I felt no satisfaction hearing that. He had built that life on lies and manipulation. Now it was collapsing under the weight of his own choices. But I didn't gloat. Instead, I got to work on something bigger than revenge. With Robert's help, I began establishing a foundation. Not just a charity that writes checks, but an organization with real legal teeth. The Charles Project would provide actual attorneys to elderly victims of family fraud fund investigations and partner with courts to prevent financial abuse. I named it after myself because if David was going to use my name to strip away my dignity, I was going to use it to restore dignity to others. Meanwhile, the investigation moved forward with mechanical precision. David's arrest came on a Tuesday morning. No sirens, no drama. Just federal agents at his door with handcuffs and a warrant. The charges were extensive. Wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, elder abuse. The evidence I'd provided had given investigators everything they needed to build an airtight case. His wife Linda filed for divorce that same week through an attorney. His insurance company suspended him pending investigation. Former clients pulled their business. The house went into foreclosure within a month. David was alone now, exactly as he'd planned for me to be. 3 months later, faced with overwhelming evidence and a potential 30-year sentence, David's lawyer approached the prosecution about a plea deal. 10 years in federal prison if he admitted guilt to all charges. David, still believing he could outsmart the system that had caught him red-handed, initially refused. He wanted to go to trial, convinced he could charm a jury the way he'd charmed neighbors and news reporters. But when his legal team showed him the mountain of evidence, including recorded phone calls the FBI had obtained through wiretaps, he finally understood. There would be no clever explanations, no sob stories about caring for a confused father. He took the deal. I received one final letter from David before his sentencing. Not mailed to my address, but hand-delivered by his attorney to Robert's office. Inside was a photograph from my 70th birthday. Me in a blue sweater, laughing with cake frosting on my chin. David beside me, arm around my shoulders, both of us genuinely happy. On the back, in his familiar handwriting, "You always believed in me, Dad. I'm sorry that wasn't enough." I sat with that photo for a long time that evening. Not crying, not raging, just remembering. Remembering the boy who asked for one more bedtime story. The teenager who cried when he accidentally broke Martha's favorite vase. The young man who called me first when he got his insurance license. They were all parts of him, and I had loved every one of them. But love, real love, demands honesty. And David had chosen deception over truth for so many years that he'd forgotten the difference. That night I burned the photograph in my fireplace, not out of hatred, but out of acceptance. The flames curled around the edges, turning our smiles to ash. I didn't need a picture to remember the good times. I needed peace with the reality of who David had become. And finally, I was getting there. 6 months after David's sentencing, I did something I hadn't planned. I returned to Sunset Manor. The morning was crisp and clear, the kind of October day that makes you grateful to be alive and breathing freely. I stood outside the facility for a long moment, staring at the place where my new life had really begun. Not where it ended, but where it started. Patricia met me at the front doors before I could even knock. She gasped when she saw me, then broke into the biggest smile I'd seen in months. "Charles, oh my goodness, look at you." We hugged, not the polite embrace you give acquaintances, but the real thing. Two people who had survived something together. Inside, the place looked different. Brighter lights, fresh paint, newer furniture in the common room. The smell was better too, less institutional, more like a place where people actually lived instead of just waited. The donations changed everything, Patricia explained as we walked the halls. Anonymous gifts, but substantial ones. We were able to upgrade almost everything. I smiled, saying nothing. We visited the room where I'd spent those 4 dark days. It was now part of an expanded library and computer center. Residents could video call, family research, their interests, stay connected to the world outside. That afternoon, I gave a talk in the activities room. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows, staff members along the walls, about 30 residents listening with the kind of attention that comes from real hunger for hope. "I'm not here because I'm wealthy," I began, "and I'm not here because I was wronged. I'm here because I was silenced, and I know how many of you feel that same way right now." Every pair of eyes stayed locked on mine. Some were wet with tears they'd been holding back for months, maybe years. "I want to tell you something I wish someone had told me when I was sitting in one of those chairs. You are not a burden. You are not forgotten. You are not finished writing your story." The applause that followed started soft, then grew louder. I saw Patricia wiping her eyes near the doorway. When I got home that evening, I finalized the last details of the Charles Project. We'd hired 6 full-time attorneys, established partnerships with elder law clinics in 12 states, and created a 24-hour hotline for people facing what I'd faced. The foundation would outlive me, continue the work long after I was gone. David had tried to erase my legacy. Instead, he'd helped me create one. David served 8 years of his 10-year sentence. I never visited, never wrote, never acknowledged the letters his attorney occasionally forwarded. Some people might call that cruel. I called it necessary. When he was released, he moved to a small town in Arizona, where nobody knew his name or his history. He got a job at a hardware store, lived in a studio apartment, kept his head down. He sent one final letter to my address in Kentucky. I almost threw it away unopened, but curiosity won. Inside was a single sentence. "I know I can never make this right, but I want you to know. I understand now what I took from you." I folded the letter, put it in my desk drawer, and never replied. Understanding isn't the same as forgiveness, and acknowledgement isn't the same as redemption. Some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. But that was David's burden to carry, not mine. On my 80th birthday, I sat on my porch in Kentucky, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and red. The Charles Project had helped over 3,000 families in 5 years. My story had inspired legislation in 6 states protecting elderly individuals from family fraud. I thought about Martha, about the life we'd built together, about the son we'd raised with such hopes and dreams. I thought about trust betrayed and dignity reclaimed. And for the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten how to feel. Peace. Not the kind that comes from getting revenge, but the deeper kind that comes from knowing you didn't let the worst thing that happened to you become the last word in your story. I wrote a letter to myself that final winter, not because I was dying, but because I had finally learned how to live. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, watching snow fall past the window, and wrote down everything I wished I could tell the broken man who'd sat in that nursing home bed 5 years earlier. "Dear Charles," I wrote, "you weren't losing your mind. You weren't too trusting. You weren't weak. You were just a father who loved too deeply and trusted too completely. When they tried to write you out of your own story, you picked up the pen and wrote the ending yourself. I am proud of the man you became when everything was taken away. I folded that letter and placed it in a wooden box on my mantel next to Martha's wedding ring and a photo of the two of us from our 40th anniversary. Not as a memorial, but as a reminder. The Charles Project continued to grow. We'd opened offices in 18 states, prevented hundreds of cases of elder fraud, and helped families navigate the legal system when love turned predatory. The foundation would outlive me by decades, continuing to protect people who found themselves where I'd once been. On quiet evenings, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if I'd never bought that lottery ticket, never had the means to fight back. Would I have died forgotten in that nursing home bed, just another elderly man who'd outlived his usefulness? The thought didn't make me angry anymore. It made me grateful. Grateful for Patricia's kindness, for Robert's integrity, for Dr. Anderson's honesty. Grateful for the chain of small mercies that had given me the chance to reclaim my life. David never contacted me again after that final letter. I heard through distant channels that he'd remarried, started over, tried to build something honest from the wreckage of his choices. I hoped that was true not for my sake, but for his. Everyone deserves the chance to become better than their worst moment. But forgiveness wasn't mine to give or withhold anymore. I'd moved beyond that. I'd found something better than either revenge or reconciliation. I'd found freedom. The last entry I made in my journal 3 days before my 81st birthday was simple. I survived. Not just the betrayal, but the bitterness. Not just the loss, but the loneliness. I learned that you're never too old to start over, never too hurt to heal, and never too betrayed to trust again, as long as you trust the right people. I closed the journal and set it beside the wooden box on the mantel. The snow was falling heavier now, covering the Kentucky hills in pristine white. Somewhere out there, families were gathering for dinners. Children were laughing. People were making memories they'd treasure or regret. And I was here in my small house with my quiet life completely and utterly free. I learned that surviving betrayal doesn't make you bitter. It makes you selective. The people who truly love you will never ask you to disappear. Trust your instincts, document everything, and remember you're never too old to rewrite your story. Thanks for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell if this resonated with you. Share your own experiences in the comments below, because your voice matters, and together we can make sure no one faces this kind of betrayal alone.